Greetings, Fright fans. I'm Carmen Dark, and welcome back to Tormented Tales, your one-stop shop for the truly terrifying and the terrifyingly true. Tonight we have two tales submitted by our viewers that touch upon an experience we've all had. That lonely, unsettling moment when the door closes behind you, the last guest leaves, and the house falls silent. Those nights when you're left home alone with only the sound of breath and the beating of your own heart for company. Though, of course, the most terrifying thing about being home alone is the thought that you may not be quite as alone as you think you are. Our first story was submitted by Tina from Delaware and outlines an incident that, I have to say, made even my hair stand on end. Enjoy. When Mommy came home. The single creepiest thing that has ever happened to me happened when I was about 14 years old and was left in the house alone for the first time. Up until that point, my mom would always have a babysitter come over. But at that age, some of the babysitters were barely 2 or 3 years older than me, so she kind of figures, what's the point? Now obviously, when my mom went out during the day or I came back from school before she had gotten back from work, I was alone at home. But this was the first real time that I was going to be left alone, by myself, at night. I remember my mom was worried. She checked and double-checked everything, gave me lists of things to remember to do and not to do, like I hadn't lived in the house my whole life. Make sure you pull the plugs before you go to bed. Don't answer the door to strangers. Be careful if you're cooking and be sure to switch the gas off. Stuff like that. Seriously, on the day she was going for the first time, the house suddenly transformed into some kind of death trap. Thing is, it wasn't what was in the house that she needed to worry about. My mom actually left around 8 p.m. She made sure I had my phone charged and made me promise to have it with me at all times, even if I was just sitting on the couch in case of emergencies. We also had a landline back then, which shows you how long ago this was. Anyway, my mom finally stops fretting and goes out the door to wherever it was she was going that night. And I just settled down to watch some TV. Until around an hour later, when the doorbell rang. Now, I didn't order any food. I wasn't expecting visitors. So I'll admit, the doorbell ringing for some unexpected visitor kind of freaked me out a little. But you know, it wasn't that scary. Probably just a neighbor or something. So I walked toward the door. Now, the other thing that's worth knowing is that our house had a security system. One of those doorbell cam things, where you could see who's ringing your bell and who's standing on your front porch before you open the door. Now, back in the day, these things were not very advanced, and the picture was kind of fuzzy and blurry, especially when the footage was taken at night. But by looking at the monitor by the door, you could tell pretty much straight away whether the person calling was someone you recognized. In this case, it was definitely someone I recognized. It was my mom. Seeing her on the monitor, I reached for the keys that my mom had made sure to leave in a little glass bowl on a coffee table by the door. As I reached for them, I had a thought. My mom locked the door behind her when she left. She had her own key. So why was she ringing the doorbell? So at first I figured, this is some kind of test. So I took a second look at the monitor. It was then that I noticed the other problems. When my mom had left the house, she had been wearing all white. She'd even commented on it because she was headed out on a date and thought it was a risk to wear white in case she spilled something on herself. We even laughed about her coming back all covered in pasta sauce or something, and how she might get lost because she'd be camouflaged in the heavy snow that had fallen in the past few days. But now, standing on the front porch and waiting for me to open the door, she was dressed all in black. Her hair was different too. She had styled it before she left to let the natural curls show a little more. Now, less than an hour later, she was here on the doorstep with her hair straightened. Looking at the camera again, I saw that there was no car in the driveway, Suddenly, a wave of panic started to rise in me. Here was my mom, standing at the front door, ringing the bell even though she has a key, wearing a totally different outfit and with different hair. After what? Walking from her date back to the house? I decided then and there that something wasn't right. I put down the keys and decided to call my mom and ask about those weird differences. But as I lifted the phone to call, there was a knock. Not on the door this time, but on the living room window. Looking across, I saw that she had moved around to the side of the house and was peering in through the glass, knocking slowly and repetitively. Long, hard, single knocks. I knew right then that this was not my mom. Worse still, as I turned back to the front door, I saw on the monitor that the figure ringing the doorbell hadn't moved. She was on the screen, standing there on the porch, but also knocking at the window. I called my mom, and almost as soon as her voice came over the speaker, the two figures who had been knocking and ringing shrank back into the dark and were gone. Mom rushed home. She drove back in her car, let herself in with her own key, and as expected, was wearing all white with her hair delicately curled when she arrived. Strangest of all was, when she did let herself in, I insisted on checking the driveway. There were 2 sets of footprints in the snow, the one she made when she left, and the one she made when she returned. Looking at the ground, you would never have known that anyone else had been there. So how about it? Do you think you would have been fooled? Would you have let the caller in? Especially if, whatever it was, looked like your mother? Let me know down in the comments. Our next story was submitted by Angeline from New Mexico and concerns a very strange occurrence. People often say that when one door closes, another opens, and that when opportunity knocks, you need to open the door. But what if the door in question has suddenly appeared out of nowhere? Then you have to be careful before you answer. You never know who it is that might be knocking. The brand new door. To call this a Home Alone story might be a little inaccurate. The place where this happened was only my home for about a week. In the time between me moving out of my previous house and into my new one. I was actually supposed to be there for 2 months, whilst the contractors got the new house ready for me to move in. But after that night, there was no way I could have stayed. Basically, I needed to move out of my previous home, and because my new place wasn't ready, the real estate agency that was managing both deals agreed to put me up in a place they had empty at a reduced rent for the 2-month gap. Obviously, it was worth it to them because they would get a cut from both transactions. Me selling my house and me buying the new one. So keeping me happy was high on their priority list. The place they gave me as a stopgap was nothing spectacular and only had the most basic furnishings, but to be honest, I just needed a place to lay my head, get clean, and store all my belongings until I could move into the new place. I was in temporary accommodation for about 6 days before the night with the door. I had spent most of that time talking to the contractors at my new house, which still looked a lot like a building site and only really came back to the stopgap place in the evening. The night that the weird thing happened, I had come back late. I had taken a shower, thrown some quick meals into the microwave, and was on my way to the couch to watch one of my favorite shows when I stopped dead in my tracks. Across the room, just adjacent to where the TV was situated, was a small red door. Around 3 feet in height, with a shiny gold doorknob and a knocker around 2/3 of the way up. Whilst that might not sound like the creepiest thing in the world, what was strange was that up until that moment, the door had not been there. I was sure of it. You have to remember that at this point, I had been living in the house for 6 days. A half-sized door in bright fire engine red, directly next to the television, is the sort of thing that one would tend to notice. It was true that I'd been busy those past few days, and that maybe I'd been a little distracted, but this I would have noticed. Placing down my tray of food, I glared at the tiny door before pulling my phone from my pocket and scrolling quickly through it. There on the screen was the listing for the house I was currently standing in, complete with photos. In those photos, there was no tiny door. I flipped furiously through my phone, searching for the video of the place I'd sent to my parents only 2 days earlier. I brought it up and fast-forwarded through it. There was a guided tour of the house, and again, no tiny door. Could someone have been in here? Was it possible that someone could have entered whilst I was out of the room and fitted a door into the wall? Maybe. But then, wouldn't I have noticed it when I first came in and loaded the show on the TV? And anyway, the door was fitted into an external wall. It couldn't lead anywhere, and if opened, would just frame a hole leading out into the parking lot. What would be the point of fitting such a door? Especially one too small for an average-sized person to fit through without stooping. I decided to call the agent and ask what the hell was going on, all whilst keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the door. Before I had a chance to speak, though, the door slowly opened. There was the low click of a lock, followed by a metallic rattle, as if someone had jostled a set of keys. Then, with a wailing creak, as if the hinges had been in place and the door unopened for decades, the whole thing opened inwards. That should have been all. The door should have opened onto the outside of the house, and whoever was fooling around opening it should have been exposed. Instead, behind the door, impossibly, there was depth and space. What looked to be, from where I was standing, a small corridor leading off into the darkness. What I could see, even from where I was standing, however, was that this corridor, which appeared to have wooden walls close to the door, had rough walls of dirt and stone the further you went along, as if this colorful entrance led not into some other portion of the house, but into a tunnel or mine shaft cut into the ground itself. Of course, I had no intention of crossing the threshold and going through that door. Whilst there may have been a tiny sliver of me that was curious to know where such a corridor or tunnel would lead, the greater part of me was terrified. Not only by thoughts of where that door might go, but of who and what might have come through it. Sprinting across the room, I reached for the handle and yanked the door firmly, slamming it shut, as the sound of what seemed to be tiny fists began to beat furiously on the other side. I moved toward the front door, out into the parking lot, and never went back inside. My things were moved the following day by the realtor to an Airbnb, where I remained for the rest of the time until my new house was ready. According to him, when he entered the property, there was no red door. He went so far as to suggest that I might have been dreaming. I thought about that, and though I was absolutely convinced that this could not possibly have been a dream, I did for a moment doubt myself. I asked the realtor to send me photos or video of the inside of the house, proof that the door wasn't really there. He did that, and included a small clip of the living room where clearly there was no tiny door. What there was, however, resting on the sofa like a piece of mocking evidence, was an empty plate. The food that had been upon it had vanished. Someone or something had been there, and someone or something had been hungry. Now that's creepy. But scarier still is that we've come to the end of our video. If you enjoyed these tormented tales, then be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our updates. And if you've had a few horrific encounters of your own, don't forget, you can submit your tales to the address in the description. Until next time, Fright fans, eat, drink, and be scary.